His mom is sort of
Because
standing
they
outside
talked a
the
lot
plane.
about that when
Well, did you find
Oh,
it?
yeah, yeah.
contaminated sites
And,
came into.
Yeah.
Did you get dinner?
Some municipalities just.
They're paying the price for the
stopped
price.
using the land.
Okay, I'd like to call the meeting to order, folks, when you're ready.
Mayor, we're good to go.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the approval of the agenda, any late items? Don't see
We're
any.
later.
Awesome, thank you. So somebody move to,
Oh, I had,
up. So you could change, yeah?
No, never mind, I'll ask it tomorrow.
Sure. Okay. Move to approve the agenda? Second? Somebody? Yes, okay, thank you. All in favor? Thank you. Public comments? What we got on the
We
list?
have James Slade
Oh,
regarding
you're kidding.
Dairy electrification.
Thank
Welcome,
you.
dude.
Thank you, and I want to begin by apologizing, Your Worship, for misspelling your name on my letter to council last week. So Gary Ander, without even asked, just for the record. So thank you for hearing me today. I'm speaking in reference to a letter I sent last week regarding electrification of the Queen of Capilano. I'm here really because 10 years ago I wrote a book called Almost Green. And this was a book about all the little things you could do in your lifestyle, potentially. Just enough people making enough little small changes, we could get on top of the climate crisis. My book was 100% wrong, is what we're eventually decided. It's only the level of systems change that we're going to address what's happening. Right now, world leaders are meeting in Poland, and it's being framed as a sort of a last chance meeting for global governments to get on board and really amp up the ambition of their commitments to address climate. And it occurred to me over recent years that we have a big opportunity right in our front yard because technologies have evolved and market conditions have changed such that electrifying the Queen of Capilano ferry, as I'm proposing in my letter, would really enable us to slash a full more than 1/3 of our island's greenhouse gas emissions. Take it right off the books permanently. What does that look like? That's the same emissions put out by 1,653 vehicles on the roads each year. And if that was a parking lot that holding all of those vehicles, that would be 9.5-acre parking lot full of cars and SUVs. So that's what we're looking at. Physically, if you can imagine what removing that from the system would do. So it's quite a massive impact. Fortunately, we wouldn't be taking a big risk in doing this. Norway has already done that for us. A few years ago, they held a competition to design an electrified ferry. And the resulting ferry's been running for a number of years now, and its annual ROI is 26 to 45%. The payback period, the manufacturer of the battery packs, which is based in Metro Vancouver, says 5 years or so that ferry will pay for itself. The fuel savings are so immense. So to me, I look at BC Ferries as a company and organization that has a tremendous amount of inertia within it. Our energy systems have enormous inertia in them. They're difficult to shift. But I'm quite keen to explore this opportunity, or at least to hear directly from BC Ferries why they are considering electrifying the Route 8 ferry, which is the Queen of Capilano. So that's really what I wanted to speak to you about tonight, and happy to take any questions. I've done some limited research on this, but I feel the business case is quite strong, and the environmental case is obviously tremendous. Thank you.
Yeah, but go ahead, David.
Have Rob first, and then I'll
Okay,
be
Rob.
Yeah, so James, obviously, step number one is making sure that the terminal at Horseshoe Bay is compatible with an electrified ferry. And we all know that they are right now in the middle of looking at rebuilding that facility. And I know that through the Fair Advisory Committee, we have loosely talked about this. Do you have any word or any inkling of where they're moving forward with that at that terminal? Or is that something that we as a council should be pushing them very hard on to ensure that they do that?
Well, that's my ask for you, is essentially, can the council, if you agree there's an opportunity here, would you be willing to engage with BC Ferries on that level? Given if there was a campaign or a similar interest in the community for such a campaign. At the moment, the ferry, I say in my letter, there's no climate plan. In fact, I think that there is, I should have said no credible climate plan. BC Ferries' climate strategy is to rely on LNG dual fuel vessels, which will reduce greenhouse gas emissions certainly, but not eliminate them. BC Ferries is just putting out a request for expression of interest for 5 new vessels, and they are essentially, just came out on October 5th. And the quote is, "We are building the low-carbon coastal ferry system that will serve BC for the middle half of this century." There's nothing in that release or specification about electric being a requirement. Safe to assume that they're looking for a diesel LNG hybrid. And really, there's no space for that in the carbon budget of 2050. We need to completely decarbonize. So to get back to your question, I don't know where they're at with what infrastructure they're installing in Horseshoe Bay. I expect it'll be LNG focused at this point, given their public strategy on that front.
David Ferguson.
Couple of questions. Thanks, James. I might have misread your letter. Are you saying electrification of the Queen of Cap or replacing it with a different boat?
That boat, according to my understanding, could be electrified. The same vessel could be converted over. There would be advantages to a new vessel, of course, in terms of efficiencies of the hull design and so forth. Full LED lighting on board, power retrofit for minimal power usage. So it could be done with the existing vessel, but a new vessel would make more sense.
Okay. Second question. I haven't had the chance to read BC's new climate change plan, although I've heard good things about it, although there's some gaps. Is BC Ferries even in it?
It's briefly mentioned, and it's citing the LNG strategy as
It's outrageous. If they're talking about boats to last till 2050, we all know that by 2050, it has to be zero carbon. Otherwise, it's not a good thing at all. So, anyway, I support action on this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
Thank you for coming to speak to us about this. I think it's a great idea, personally, putting on what I heard today called a purple unicorn idea. But why not think big when we've got such a climate crisis ahead of us, and when we've got a ferry terminal redesign underway?
Exactly.
I wanted to ask you if you had seen Washington Ferries apparently has issued a new long-range plan, and it includes some other things which I can see you nodding, so you know about. But
Yeah.
the first 2 ferries will run on batteries and electric, with also with fuel, so they'll be hybrids.
Right.
And but they're also looking at an electric ferry at a county level is being proposed for a county south of San Juan, which name I missed. It might have been Whatcom or something. If you want info about that, I can probably get that.
Thank you. I'd
Okay.
like to see that. Yeah, I was aware of the Washington State Ferries electrification long-term plan. They showed leadership. That sparked a little bit of press coverage up here. And BC Ferries' response was essentially, we need the flexibility of being able to move our boats around wherever we need to. Of course, the Capilano has never been deployed on another route ever, so.
No, that's right.
Right. Thank you.
So I loved your expression, the clean queen.
Yeah, clean the queen.
And sometimes you need something catchy like that to give it a bit of a push. Sorry, as a non-technical person here, given the relatively short run that we have, does that make us a little bit of a poster child for this type of...
That's exactly my point, is that this route in particular, and the fact that it's sheltered, is ideally suited for this. And it mimics very closely the Ampere, the Norwegian ferry, which is actually slightly larger than ours in capacity. Has a similar length of run. You'd only need to charge it in Horseshoe Bay during the normal time to turn around a ferry load and unload and so forth. So, and it's all done robotically, so.
Maureen?
Some 5 years ago, a number of us had a meeting with senior BC Ferry staff, and at that time they were aware of the work that was being done locally with Corvus, and they were looking into things, and they have continued to do so, but the public statements are not
Right,
that clear when it comes to ongoing activities.
yeah. I think there might be an opportunity to just give them a little bit of a nudge, and I think, you know, as Councillor Kale pointed out, because we're so ideally suited, I just think it's a nice, you know, opportunity for an unusual suspect to come in and say, hey, we think that there's more to be looked at here. So that's all I'd be asking for, is not a pitchforks, but more of a, can we open a conversation about whether this might be feasible? Have you done any additional studies that you haven't released, and so forth?
Who's on BIMTAC right now?
It's several of us.
Several of us.
David has been the chair, Rob and I have been on it,
Yeah.
Allison was
Yeah.
on it.
May I just suggest, it's been a while since we had Mark Wilson over here. He made a visit to Bowen Island during our last term. We did a bit
Mark
of-
Collins,
Mark
the CEO, Mark
Yeah,
Collins.
sorry. Why don't we invite him?
It's a good idea.
Can only say no?
He's
All right, move this forward, go ahead, Allison.
Have you submitted to the public comments and ideas they were asking for Horseshoe Bay redevelopment, to suggest that it be redesigned to have the electric capacities to fuel electric ferries?
I have not, and I'm not actually aware what the status is of that public, or that
Well,
engagement
go on
period. I
their
thought they were
website,
doing
you can-
stakeholder engagement at this stage and haven't moved forward to a broader, and so I'm simply representing myself in this.
Well, okay, but as a Joco citizen,
Yeah.
anybody can submit comments.
I'll
to
definitely,
various
that's a great idea, and I'll
stakeholders,
do that.
And my understanding is with the new ferries that are being built in the other islands, that they're being built with the dual fuel
Mm-hmm.
electric capability, so that once they can be charged up in those remote places, they could run entirely on electric. But part of the problem is BC Hydro doesn't have enough powers.
It's my understanding that there's no battery hybrid ferry in the works or planned for BC
Okay,
ferries.
well then, the
That
other
it's
thing I was
LNG
going-
and diesel.
Okay, well,
Am
that's-
I incorrect on
I
that?
think you're incorrect.
Well, that's different information
Okay.
from what I heard a month ago. So you might want to.
You may well be correct. Councillor Nicholson says that they are doing that, so I'll go back and
Yeah,
look at that.
and you need to actually send your letter to BC Ferries
Yep.
and to the ferry commissioner, because he reviews all the capital projects.
Will do.
Yeah, and I think, Rob?
Yeah, I'm just wondering, you know, dovetailing on sort of what Maureen had to say, and I think maybe possibly inviting Mark Collins. I don't know if a council meeting is an appropriate spot to do that at, but we could put forward a motion that we send out a letter of invite to Mark Collins to come to meet with us to discuss the possibility of an electrified company.
Yeah, I think we've approached BC Ferries on the electric ferry thing, there's no question about that. But it's whether, if this would be advantageous for them, certainly a lower capital cost for them, their return would be a lot faster. I don't know if they even think about these things, but it's certainly good to get it into their heads.
Great.
That'd be awesome.
Okay.
So why don't we take this back to FinTech and see what we push
So
it
you think
forward.
that would be the spot, Gary, sorry?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
To ask for them to recommend a motion to council
Yeah.
to do that?
Yes.
Instead of us just doing it right now?
Yeah.
Okay.
Cool. Okay. Thank you very much for
Pleasure.
joining this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Good to see you.
All right, so we'll move on to consent agenda. Does anybody have anything that's
Article 3.3.
3.2?
I just have a quick question with 3.3.
Okay. Okay, so can we, council approve the terms as outlined in the December 2018 consent agenda, amended consent agenda? Can you move that? Second. All in favor? Thank you. Okay, so we pull those two.
Do we go 11, under 11 there?
Yeah, we'll go through
Items are moved.
Yeah. It's a long way back there.
I'm assuming Sarah's not here.
It's in 11. Okay, so delegations. Oh. See anybody yet?
Nope, there are no
Quiet.
delegations. Not today.
So it's back, business arising from the minutes. Emma.
Where's it?
I know.
She was here.
I think I hear her running down the stairs. Here she
comes.
comes.
All right, Emma, thank you.
Okay. You don't?
I don't think so.
Good, because I didn't see one.
Okay.
Hi, good evening, Mayor and Council. Bringing a development variance permit for consideration. And I apologize not having a presentation for visuals, but a quick recap of this application. It's for 1325 Catalina Road. It's located on the east side of the island in the Scarborough neighborhood. Excuse me. And if you recall, this is a fairly narrow lot that slopes steeply to the ocean. There is an existing deserted house and relatively new concrete foundation walls that were originally built to accommodate a septic system, which was never installed. The applicant is now proposing to use those walls to build the new house. And to do that, they're asking for a reduction in the side setback from 3 meters to 2.5 meters. And that's because the wall, the existing concrete foundation wall, is pretty much sitting right on the lot, the setback line. And in order to build the house on top and put cladding material, they're looking for a 0.5 meter reduction. This went to public notice about a month ago, and no public submissions were received during that time, but there was one letter of support that was included in the application, and this was from the neighbor directly to the north of the property. So with the results of the referrals, staff is recommending that council approve this development variance permit.
Thank you, Emma. Questions?
Just a clarification. So the letter of support came from the neighbor who would be most affected by
Yes.
moving this out. Thank you.
Anybody else? Great. Somebody want to read the recommendation? I'll do that. Sure, Dave.
I'll move that council issue development variance permit DVP 03-2018 for the variance of side setback for 1325 Catalina Road, legally described as Lot D of 2, Plan 12746, Block A, DL 1553, PID 008-830-100.
Second. Rob, thank you. Any other discussion? All right, I'll ask the question, all in favor? Thank you, it's unanimous. Thank you, Alan.
Thank you, Emma.
She's on this.
Yeah, yeah, come back, I guess.
I do have a presentation for this one.
All right, Emma.
All right, so this is for an OCP amendment and rezoning application for Veterans Park. It was brought for introduction several months ago, and then we brought it to the Advisory Planning Commission, Parks, Trails, and Greenways Advisory Committee for internal referrals. And now I'm bringing back draft bylaws for amending the official community plan and the land use bylaw. And this is the location, for those not familiar, off of Athletic Park Drive near Josephine Lake. The current OCP designation is Cowan Point Comprehensive Development Area Block 1, and this was originally designated with the intention for 2-hectare minimum residential lots, an athletic park on this parcel, as well as a future school site. The current land use zoning is actually rural residential 3, which you'll notice is not consistent with the OCP designation. And part of the reason we're proposing an amendment Rural residential permits principal uses as shown here, mainly dwelling in agriculture. In June of this year, council directed staff to undertake rezoning of this parcel. So the proposed OCP amendment is to keep the Cowan Point Comprehensive Development Area Block 1 and amend it by adding the use of public works yard. The land use bylaw proposal amendment is proposed for a multi-use activity park, which is zone P2, and it is the most permissive of the park zones, as well as industrial medium zone IM, which would accommodate the public works yard that's currently in use on this site. The P2 use would allow for the current outdoor assembly uses and playing field, as well as the proposed disc golf course. It would also allow for continued protection of the riparian areas, and I think delineating these two uses will allow further environmental protection from the industrial uses, as well as help mitigate conflicts between the industrial and recreational uses. A number of official community plan objectives and policies support this proposal. The original objective for the Cowan Point Comprehensive Development Area Block 1, Objective 66, was to provide land that would provide community and institutional uses that responded to the needs of the broader Bowen community, which is what the parks and the industrial zoning would do. There are also objectives that support the park zoning as well as the industrial zoning in this area. Objective 140 asks us to secure and maintain a diverse supply of parkland that across the island that would meet community needs. The Parks Plan does identify this parcel as a community park. And Policy 336 supports multi-purpose playing fields on both the east and the west side of the island. And Objective 77 speaks to light industrial uses, as long as they serve the community and have minimal impact to nearby uses. The referrals that did take place came back fairly supportive from both the Advisory Planning Commission and the Parks, Trails and Greenways Advisory Committee. The key concerns were protecting the environmentally sensitive areas and also limiting the area of the public works yard, which the proposal does. We also heard back from West Vancouver Schools, and they are concerned about retaining the future school use in this zoning and or in this amendment, and by keeping the Cowan Point Comprehensive Development Area designation, we do provide for that. So staff recommend that council grant first reading to these two amendment bylaws.
Any questions for Anna as well?
Yeah, I have a couple. First, I'm very glad to see this happen because this became municipal parkland back in 2006. And it's about time that it was zoned that way, especially since then we've developed trails, and we have obviously the loggers park works have happened there in what's now called Veterans Park. A note to anybody who's been keeping files or watching this over the years, it used to be called Athletic Park in the different notes and things. Also now we've got a group with a use agreement, whatever those are called. Collaborative use agreement, who are starting to do fundraising and lots of volunteer work towards developing a disc golf course. And so my question, so I'm really in support of this, and I have asked staff various times over the years, there's in my files different staff over the years, and so now here it comes, this is great. A couple of questions. The OCP amendment, you propose just adding the one little bit there about public works yard or whatever that other use was. That leaves the other main use as athletic park only, and yet we're talking about some environmental protection area I see in here, and also the natural park uses that are part of P2. And I wonder if that might, being in the official community plan that travels council to council over the years, whether that might be misleading to people in the future, thinking that we or the community had suggested that it only be an athletic park, whereas our new parks plan adopted this year recommends it be called community park. So I'm wondering if the word either just park or as well as athletic park or the words community park could be added to make that clear. And the second thing I wanted to say was had to do with that zoning, the kind of industrial. What are the uses that go along with that term, which I,
Industrial.
Well, there's a list there.
industrial medium, oh, I see, that's them.
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay.
those are all the permitted uses under the zoning.
Okay, I just had never noticed that
There's-
part. Thank
yeah.
you, that's fine.
There's very few zones on the island.
Yeah.
Never come.
So it's also in the multi-use activity park of P2, has all those other designations in there.
Right, but that's only for the land use bylaw. In the official community plan amendment that goes along with this, it would say athletic park and then the words public works yard would be added, but no other kind of park. And land use bylaws can be changed over the years. The OCP generally carries on further, and it's sort of supposed to express the community's, it is supposed to express the community's mind.
Allison?
I'm just trying to understand the map in relation to the more charty one that's in the file. The white area on the right, is that
Nothing.
ours or is that residential?
Private.
That's private, so you're, for the land use bylaw, the whole of A is going to be changed to multi-use activity park. So it would mean another rezoning if there was ever a school to go in there.
Yes.
You can't call it multi-use activity park for schools or and/or elementary schools, so that we don't have to go through a rezoning. Like we've got village civic and village residential and stuff on some of the zones in the code, so is there,
There's currently no zone that allows for that many number of park uses and also a school use.
no, but I'm just saying, you could have park use
Civic.
and civic, school,
Mhm.
and not pick where they go at this point, because the Veterans Park doesn't take up that whole area.
Yes. So the reason I mean, you could accommodate both the park use and the school use in a comprehensive development zone. At this point, the reasoning for not doing that is because the school site physically is not determined. And whether or not they need the site right now is still undetermined. It's just based on projected need. And this projected need was from the original rezoning, which was about 15 years ago, and that need never materialized. So to be safe, they want to continue to have that included in the OCP designation.
Yeah, well, I'm not objecting to that, I'm trying
Yeah.
to make it simple so that we don't
Yeah.
have to have another rezoning if they decided 5 years from now to build a school.
I was
Who knows
thinking,
what the chances of that are?
yeah, I was also thinking if the school district does want to have a school site, triggering a rezoning would allow for the community to discuss it on a wider scale. If that were the best site at that time, because it could be quite a ways in the future.
My recollection from 15 years ago, there's a requirement, and I don't think in the school act or something, when you had a rezoning of that particular size of area that we had to provide for school site in there. That's why it was put in. We didn't have a choice in that in the OCP.
I think that's something Emma can research
Yeah.
between first and second reading.
I think it's probably
Mm.
good,
I'd be happy to read the recommendation.
yeah.
Can I just ask Emma one more quick question for
Sure.
the recommendation? Emma, in that site, the B, the purple area there, what's happening there right now, and what's the plan for a works yard there? I'm trying to sort of picture that, so I should pop over there with my bike.
It's currently being used as an auxiliary public works yard. So it helps facilitate a lot of the work that happens on that side of the island, so that they don't need to transport equipment and storage materials across the island every time.
And that's been going on for a while, but it's basically not technically in the land use
So,
bylaw.
yeah.
That's why we've had a temporary use permit issue.
That's, thank you.
Allison?
Before somebody reads the motion, I think the referral has to say West Vancouver School District 45,
Yeah.
not West Vancouver Schools.
Okay, Mickey will make, I'm sure, no?
You're good?
Can I,
Yeah, go ahead.
well, I'm wondering if, I've made a couple of suggestions, and I don't know whether it's appropriate now just to leave them as suggestions and something that staff can take away and think about, and, or whether we should put them in at this point. But seeing as it's first reading, I'm hoping that it's okay just to have this input be written down by staff. Can you suggest?
I think a recommendation is a good idea.
Okay, then I would like to move, or I would like to be able to amend this to read that the words park be added to the OCP list of uses. And that's my main one. And, oh, and that the words disc golf course. No, never mind. That's fine.
So you want to replace athletic park with park?
I would like to replace athletic park with park and athletic park,
Okay.
if that's clear.
Does anybody have a problem with that?
Emma's wiggling her head, so I don't know if
Yeah,
that's
she is.
clear.
Yeah.
Maybe we can just say park, because,
How about we have it that staff be directed to report back regarding the addition of the word park to the OCP as part of the second reading document. And then I think that triggers it. I like resolutions, and that way you can have a conversation with Emma between first and second, I think, too.
that's great, because I don't want to make changes that change something more significant.
Right.
And I also don't want to necessarily lose the words athletic park, which trace back. So I move that Emma, I move that staff report back on the feasibility of adding the words park to the list of OCP designated uses.
And get a second for that?
Yeah.
Thank you. And any further discussion? All right, all in favor? Thank you, Allison.
Yeah, I think it's necessary, but I'm not going to vote against it.
Okay, thank you. Unanimous. And somebody want to read the recommendation?
I'd be happy to read it.
Actually, I said I'd read it.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
My apologies.
Yeah. That bylaw number 474-2018, cited as Bowen Island Municipality Official Community Plan Bylaw 282-2010, Amendment Bylaw number 474-2018, be read a first time. That bylaw number 473-2017, cited as Bowen Island Municipality Land Use Bylaw number 57, 2002 Amendment Bylaw number 473-2018, be read a first time. That Council refer bylaws number 473-2018 and 474-2018 to the Advisory Planning Commission, West Vancouver School District 45, and the Islands Trust, and that Council direct staff to report back with the results of the referrals of the application.
I'll second it.
Perfect. Any further discussion? Ask a question, all in favor? Perfect, unanimous. Thank
And
you.
as part of your reporting back, could you also clarity regarding the name of the park? I'm confused if it's Veterans Park, Athletic Park, and I don't think the Veterans Park was ever
No.
officially done.
It was used in the parks plan.
Okay.
No, is it? Okay.
Which
So it's
Maybe
on
if
some
you could-
documents.
Somewhere in the report, if you could add the words previously known as athletic park, it'll allow some continuity for people looking 20 years from now. What happened back then? Whatever happened to athletic park? And that would be helpful, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Ed. Daniel Martin. Read business licensing bylaw enforcement fee schedule.
It's like all the lights.
How did you do that?
Ominous.
Thank you. So I have today bylaws 471 and 472. So just some background on this bylaw enforcement. So in September, Council directed staff to report on the value and feasibility of an enforcement policy for business licensing. And as a part of that in October, staff had reported back Council that meeting adopted the business license bylaw, and they also directed staff to include an enforcement fee schedule for business licensing at that meeting. So just further background, so business license bylaw 465 was the bylaw that adopted our business licensing bylaw program that comes into effect January 1st, 2019. So it's not yet in effect, but we'll be taking applications starting in the new year, but not enforcing it immediately, but giving it sort of a lag transition period to goal is to get people to get their licenses before we look at enforcement. But we thought it's important to have that enforcement policy and the bylaws in place when we start. So we currently have a bylaw notice enforcement bylaw, which is number 196, since that's the one where it has all the fines and stuff for whatever you may do that triggers a fine you violated one of the various violated one of our bylaws. And then business license bylaw 465 is our business license bylaw. So what these bylaws would do, one would amend the business license bylaw, so it would just include a sentence that says each day an offense continues as a separate offense. And then the bylaw notice enforcement would have a fining schedule, and so it ranged from, go to this one for stuff like that. And essentially would be a $25 fine for the first day, and it would escalate the second offense to the third offense. So the idea behind it is that essentially it's it's more intended as sort of a nudge to people to say, hey, there's a thing you need to apply. And our general, I think our policy in bylaw enforcement is that you get a warning the first time and you get a ticket the second time. So it's essentially it's meant to be a nudge to people to say, to remind you that, okay, you need to do this. This is the bylaw, everyone with a business license, but that there are some teeth in terms of if there is somebody who's blatantly, ignoring it and disregarding it, that the ability is there to start to get punitive, but that sort of ramps to that. So we did bring this to the EDC. Their concerns, more of the business license program in general, is this financially, does it break even? Are the fees lower? Many of them are business owners who have business licenses in other municipalities, and they'll say this is lower than what we pay elsewhere. And just questions, I guess, how we're enforcing it or implementing it, or how feasible it is to actually capture, everybody who's operating on Bowen. Is it possible to actually catch everyone who's operating without a business license? And sure answer no. So the recommendation is that the two bylaws be read for a second and third time.
Allison?
I think we might have a couple of typos in bylaw 471.
Okay.
Well, number 13, schedules. The following schedules are to sand form. I think it's are attached to and form rather than sand. And I'm just curious, is the only schedule that's being changed B? Because you said the following schedules are attached to and form part of this bylaw, and you're deleting all the section 13 schedules.
Yeah.
And replacing, I think it's them, not yet. So I'm just curious as to why you didn't just delete section 13's B and replace it with the new B. Makes me wonder why all the others are all changed too, but they're not. So it's only B that's changed.
Oh, I see that.
Yeah.
I'm not sure offhand. As I look through it.
So we could fix the simple typo, but maybe think about the other section really.
This is first, second, and third.
Third, second,
Okay.
third.
So we need to sort it.
It's gotta be fixed.
I'd suggest
Or
just
just do first,
three.
it's fine.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I had a question
Yeah.
concerning, where is it now? Sorry. 472, the addition, each day that an offense continues. Is that each calendar day or each business day?
What if each calendar day?
Is that normal?
That's normal, that's the language in basically many of our other bylaws. Having said that, I think the one that it gets used for is barking dogs. When I was talking to bylaws, essentially, if your dog barks in one day, your dog barks, it's a second, it's not a continuation of the same offense, but it's a new offense. So this is where you see sort of news stories of people who end up getting, are operating a business without a business license, and the neighbors complain, and they end up getting dinged every day, but, it's sort of the worst case scenario.
Is business a defined term anywhere? I mean, or business day? Because otherwise I can see us getting in an argument of what was a business day. It'll be different for each
It's
business.
defined by the Interpretation Act, so that's what we look at when we define business day, calendar days.
The other thing that, like the EDC question was sort of, is this retroactive? Like, do we say, as of January 1st, you had to have a business license, and it's now March, so you're 90 days, and we're gonna say here's 90. But no, it's like you have to write a ticket for each. It's always somebody would amass this, 100 days worth of tickets, and we're giving them to you all at once. But we would say, okay, we noticed you don't have a business license, you've ignored the warning, now you have a ticket on this day, we've come and physically given you a ticket, and the next day it would be so it's not something that just happens automatically, but it'd be like, we would come and give you notice.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Okay, so I have the same question as Maureen, but so the way I understand it now, it's not that somebody gets a $25 a day, they get a fine every single day until they've got the license. It's rather they get fined, they would get a fine, charged a fine for this day, and then you realize, oh, they still haven't done it, so you go back 2 weeks later, and it's another $25, that's what or whatever the fine would be. Is that what you're saying? Not all of those days?
Yeah, so in theory, given the bylaw, we could, like if somebody's ignored it, we could say, okay, on Monday, we're gonna come and give you a ticket, and come in the next day to get your license, we'll give you a notice the next day, and we'll give you a notice, we could, but we have to proactively do that. It's not that it automatically accrues and we can't say,
No.
here's your 5 days of fine.
There has to be some personal contact
Each time.
to say you're actually offending on that day.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
And then I would imagine how we enforce it is sort of, we'd say, we're given a letter and say, we've noticed you don't have one, come and get one by this date. And then they haven't done it by this date, then we say, okay, now we're gonna escalate and give you a ticket, and we'll say, by this date, do it.
Okay, all right.
Like our goal is always to work towards compliance and not punish.
In fairness.
Yeah.
So do we want to, is everybody happy with the rates? Where did you get all the rates? Just boilerplate or like a different?
Yeah, we sort of, we looked at other places and they ranged widely, so essentially we just went low. We went on the lower end of the range that we could find. With the idea being that then you can still ramp it up if necessary, but then, because if we thought the first fine was like $500, we would probably just never use it, because it would be such a big step for the first time.
Well, that's great. Should we go ahead with the recommendation, but just to keep to the first reading until we get the other part of it straightened out? All right. Okay, so the bylaw number 471, 2018, cited as Bowen Island Municipality bylaw notice enforcement bylaw number 196, 2008, amendment bylaw number 471, 2018, be read a first time. And that bylaw number 472, 2018, cited as Bowen Island Municipality Business License bylaw number 465, 2018, amendment bylaw number 472, 2018, be read a first time. Second. Thank you. Any further discussion? All right, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Mike is abstain.
Huh?
I'll abstain from
Okay.
this, and I know it goes
That's voting
You're
in
voting
favor.
in
Yeah,
favor?
yeah.
That's unanimous. All right, so back to Daniel Martin again.
Thank you. So this one's a bit of a sort of a, you'll notice in the report, kind of a two-part report, and so I'll go through the presentation. It sort of has two components, so if you can bear with me. But so what we have is an application for a temporary use permit at 345 Robinson Road. And so what the application is for is to use to allow commercial guest accommodation as a permitted use. So 345 Robinson Road is operated as a short-term rental. The municipality received a complaint that the property was being operated contrary to the land use bylaw. So the bylaw department investigated the applicant and applied for a temporary use permit to allow the use of commercial guest accommodation. So they have applied, and so we did a site visit and we spoke to the applicants and to the property manager. But what staff actually recommend with it is that council defer consideration of this temporary use permit and then instead direct staff to consider short-term rentals on an island-wide approach. So we thought, one, nervous about sort of setting a precedent that this is the approach that we want to take. Sort of a key part that we know that this isn't the only one on Bowen, but it's better to have a systematic approach rather than sort of opening the door to say this is how we want to approach any other similar circumstance. So I was just going to now go into sort of broader, the issue more broader. So the land use bylaw permits commercial guest accommodation in some parts of Sun Cove, so the village commercial zones, so like the marina allows commercial guest accommodation. So this is the overnight guest sleeping accommodation for transient paying guests, not in a bed and breakfast, and may include a washroom and a kitchen within the individual unit. So the kitchen is one of the key pieces of that. The land use bylaw permits bed and breakfast in practically all residential areas as a home occupation. So that means it's subject to, among other things, the operator be a resident of the property. And that the bed and breakfast not have a separate kitchen or cooking facility for use by guests. We then have regulation when you provide guests with a breakfast. And we have a maximum number of bedrooms, so it's 4 or 5 depending on the lot size, and you provide 1 parking space, and this is per guest, but per guest bedroom. So the key pieces of our current land use bylaw are that you be a resident of the property, so you're not renting out somewhere where you're not living, but essentially it's a component, an essential piece of that is that you're living on the property and you're renting out bedrooms within it, and then not have a separate kitchen or cooking facility. Our secondary suites provisions then say that you're not allowed to detach secondary suite or a secondary suite on the same property as a bed and breakfast. So when you build a detached secondary suite, you're saying, I'm having a detached secondary suite, I'm not having a bed and breakfast on my property, but they're split that way. So there are short-term vacation rentals. Airbnbs is the platform on Bowen. It's not clear exactly how many are, so here like places like Airbnb will list things, and some of them are listed are compliant bed and breakfasts, and some are non-compliant commercial guest accommodation. It's not always apparent from looking at the listing what that is. So it said here, staff searches on Airbnb reliably find 20 places with a kitchen available to rent. I was just looking now and I found 83 homes.
I'm sorry, did you say 83?
83 with a kitchen, that was my search. So,
That's because everybody's supposed to have gone home by now, and the postings come up afterwards.
So other communities have taken a wide variety of ways of addressing this. So I've sort of put this on a scale from more permissive to more restrictive. So we're currently over here, we don't permit it. And I've just put many others. This is common throughout many places in BC, just as they say we allow bed and breakfasts, but we don't allow any sort of short-term rentals. Other places, so Seashelt allows it with a business license. You're allowed it in not the rural zones, but in their residential zones. You're allowed to have short-term rental. You need a business license. Included in that is things like notifying neighbors, telling your neighbors like the contact information of who's managing it, and some sort of good neighbor stuff. Nelson allows it with a business license, but the business license has a cap on it, so it says you're allowed 1 per, I believe it's like 1 per block, and so many types in the municipality. Some places permit it through a temporary use permit, so Lions Bay does that in Lansville, and that can be accompanied with like a cap of it to say, there's a policy that says we'll allow so many in the municipality through a temporary use permit, but there's a cap on that. Some permit it in a dwelling for a limited time. So this is another way that Nelson does. Nelson has different categories, or Victoria. So Victoria says you can place if you have a principal residence where you live, you can get a business license, you can rent that as a short-term rental on a limited basis, the idea being that you're doing it when you're away on vacation. You can do it, or if you're in a suite, your landlord's permission, you can rent it for a period of time. Some places permit it in a dwelling, but they require a second dwelling on the site. So like the Fino says, they allow it in most of their residential areas, but they say you actually need a second dwelling on the property, that one of them has a long-term resident in it, and the other can be a short-term rental. Rossland says that they permit it through rezoning, so they have a zone, and they say if you want it, you have to rezone to be this zone, and then your property can be this short-term rental, and they have a cap for the area, and they say we want, I think it's no more than 5% of the properties. So I sort of present this more to say that there's a number of different approaches, and that basically all the communities have come up and have said, okay, this is what works in our community. So what works in Victoria or in Rosslyn or in Lions Bay may or may not work on Bowen, but just that there's this big range of all the stuff that's possible, and that's, especially now that we have business licensing, the ability to craft the regulations to match what our goal is are there. But you need that sort of policy piece first to say this is the goal of the community. Yeah, so our recommendation is direct staff to develop a work plan for the community consultation process to develop a short-term vacation rental policy.
Thanks, Daniel. Is anybody against STRs? Basically, that we should ban them on the island. I don't think that's completely fair.
I mean, I would say they currently are banned.
They are current.
Well, I know, but we're going forward here. This is what we're trying to do, is put the pieces back together again.
Well, I think maybe the more interesting question is just, do we support proceeding with the community consultation? When we've got a population, when you look at the households here, and 1 in 4 household is a non-primary residence, that in some instances, 1 in 4 resident households on the island are not primary residences. That's a very large pool, and obviously we have not been able to enforce the land use bylaw as it stands, and I don't think we should hold on to it. I think we do need to get something that's more flexible and reflects needs of our community.
Today,
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Go ahead, Sil.
Oh, just, I think the idea of a plan for community consultation process is a really good idea.
Yeah.
And, however, I have a question, because it kind of relates to number 4, recommendation 4, which is that council refer the development of a work plan to the Economic Development Committee and the Housing Advisory Committee for recommendations. So I just want to be clear before we move this one, the work plan for community consultation, how is that different or similar from, or do they overlap?
I've got it all as the same recommendation. I don't know.
No, but 2 and 4 seem to be contradictory, I think.
I don't have numbers on that.
Oh, on the report.
I think if the 4th clause read,
Oh, up there.
so if the 4th clause read that council refer the work plan to the Economic Development Committee and the Housing Advisory Committee for recommendations, I think that's what's intended, because I
think
had
that's
paused.
the key.
No, my point is, when I was reading it initially, I thought, who's doing the work plan? And it's staff that's doing the work plan.
Developing
It's
it.
the committees that are giving feedback. Is that correct?
That's correct.
That's correct.
So if we strike the words refer the development of a from number 4, will that work?
Yeah,
Right.
that
Okay.
council refer
Okay.
the work plan.
Or do we want staff to work with the Economic Development Committee and the Housing Advisory Committee on the development of the work plan?
Daniel, what was your intent?
I think my intent was like what Maureen said,
Yeah.
that staff would develop it and then go to the EDC and the housing committee
Yeah.
for recommendations before coming back to council.
And I think that would be more appropriate than us
Yeah.
and the committees to develop.
Yeah.
it.
Yes.
Yeah,
So
okay,
it's
so we just revert,
Yeah.
Yeah, but the wording doesn't work, the council's referring it, and we want, what I'm hearing Daniel say is that staff will develop a plan and then take it to the EDC and Housing Committee for comment and input.
Mhm.
And,
Recommendation.
and so I think number 4 needs to be reworded to say, and that staff,
that council direct staff to?
and that staff be requested to consult with the Economic Development, to get the input of the Economic Development Committee and the Housing Advisory Committee on the draft work plan,
And report back to
and
council.
report back to council.
Is that the intention? Did you, sorry, Rob, go ahead.
Just a question, Daniel. The EDC and the Housing Advisory Committee, are they recommending we're moving in this direction, or what? Has there been anything from that yet?
There's been discussion on both of them, both those committees about this topic.
Yeah.
Not so much making recommendations, they haven't made, but more saying that this is something to be addressed. So they both talked about as the business licensing, with the EDC, the business licensing discussion as it comes up.
Yeah.
The EDC sort of flags that, so currently if you're operating a short-term rental, you can't get a business always been the case, like you're always not compliant with the zoning, but it sort of raised it as an issue that, now that we have business licensing, it sort of raised it again as a thing we need to address. So it's probably different EDC members have different views, and the committee hasn't made a recommendation, but they're very interested in the topic.
And the Housing Advisory Committee, because I know there's obviously that tension between, is this taking away rental housing? Do they feel it's a big enough issue to go forward with this?
They had developed their work plan. I'm not sure it's made it on this agenda, but one of their items they wanted to bring up was short-term rentals. And so we said, well, we're actually bringing this report to council. And so it may get referred to you in the future. But yeah, so again, they're very interested in the topic.
Allison?
Well, a couple of things. I know when Murray Atherton made his presentation to us last council meeting, he asked that the Tourism Vaughan Island be involved in the discussion, so I don't know whether we ask you to talk with them at this point, or that's my first question.
Sure, I had pegged them as sort of a stakeholder, so we said we have a work plan.
Okay, so
And they
that's
would be
stakeholder
captured.
consultation versus
Yeah.
the work plan.
Yeah.
Okay, and then my second question was, what sort of timeline are you looking at for this? And then I got a third one.
Okay. So realistically, it's going to the EDC and the Housing Advisory Committee, and I know the Housing Advisory Committee doesn't meet till, I think, February 1st, and the EDC is probably in January, so then we're looking at coming back.
Maybe 2 or 3 months.
Yeah.
So you've got to develop a work plan first,
Yeah.
and then you've got to take
So
it.
then come back to
so-
council, but yeah,
Yeah.
in maybe March.
And council will also have an opportunity at our second strategic planning session, it should be rolled into the discussions as to prioritize
Yeah.
different issues.
Um,
So that will be council's opportunity is to really put it in.
And I guess the other is, which I knew there was another file I had to bring with me. We developed at the Economic Development Committee a number of years ago an enforcement policy which had a whole bunch of criteria. And so, largely to deal with some of the issues that were coming up. So looking at your number 3, the council directs staff not to pursue enforcement until a short-term vacation rental policy has been considered. What about all the other STVRs on the island?
Same.
Well, it's compliance for 345 Robinson Road that's listed there.
What?
Not just for all the other STVRs. So just to give everybody else comfort.
This is the only one on the table.
Well, this is the only one that's applied for a temporary use permit. But is it going, by not covering everybody off with the deferring and maybe referring to the sort of good neighbor policy that we developed at EDC about 5 years ago. Is everybody else, is this going to trigger a whole bunch of neighbor complaints to get everybody else on the radar? And then I guess the other thing is, I honestly thought going ahead with the TUP might be an excellent way to get all the public comment out there.
If I may answer that, one of the reasons staff is not recommending pursuing this is because they have fulfilled a number of conditions.
Yeah.
For the most part, the neighbors are not in opposition, and I would hate to have a blanket do not enforce, because there could be problem ones, and I think it needs to be a case-by-case basis.
Yeah.
Well, that's why I was referring to the policy that had been developed for enforcement, to get it clear that, you got to do all these things.
So a policy that was developed?
The Economic Development Committee developed a policy and brought it to council.
And what happened to it?
I think it just sort of got lost in limbo with maybe the election
It's not
change.
policy, it's not policy.
No, but we developed a draft policy because right now, we don't really enforce. And we were getting a couple of complaints, but the complaint policy was noise related.
Well, the thing is, we have to deal with the SDRs, there's no
Oh, I'm
question.
not
And this
disagreeing
is,
that we
all
have
this
to
is
deal
doing
with
is initiating
Okay.
the program, that's
Well,
all.
I'm
That's all.
disappointed that it's not being initiated faster, that we're not saying, okay, we're not going to enforce for all of them, provided you do this, this, and this, until we develop the policy. And
Well, we
I
can't.
would be quite happy to have the top go forward so that we would flush out
and it's an easy way to flush out the information.
Oh, I think we'll be able to do that just fine. And the reason the TUP, we have to be careful with TUPs, because what's gonna happen is if they get a TUP, every other STR on the island is gonna come for a TUP. Guaranteed. Well, because I don't think we should be throwing them out like that, but emergency situations.
Just
So,
a quick process question, are we gonna deal with these one at a time then?
Yes, I
only
think
see
they
one
should be
up.
severed, so
Okay.
I would suggest one at a time.
Okay, then I'm happy
Let's
to
do
move
it.
that.
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Sorry, can I just?
Oh, sorry, Maureen, go
Give
ahead.
that a chance to finish my thoughts on this one. So, there are at least 83 illegal operations in the interim.
Yep.
We're deferring consideration in part because we don't want a lot of requests coming in from people who are attempting to make legal their circumstances. Part of this, I'm assuming, has to do with simple workload as we're trying to put in place a business licensing program for other parts of business on the island. I have questions about retroactivity. So would someone who continues to operate an illegal short-term vacation rental on the island, once we get through this process, and let's assume that an individual operation is okay to proceed and is able to get a business license, is there any thought of retroactive penalties? And I would hope not. Good, thank you. Okay. I think if we're able to get through a public consultation process and come up with a decent bylaw by March, April, we'd be doing really, really well, given that
gotta
this is
figure
not,
they've been out there for 5 years or something.
well, it's not been addressed in more than a decade.
No.
You know, so good on you for moving on this.
Oh,
I was going to suggest, and I'll leave it to Kathy to weigh in, pairing 1 and 4 and 2 and 3, just so that they sort of relate to each other. I can read them out if you'd like.
I think Daniel had a comment first.
I just want to comment that was on Maureen's question about the number of, or comment number of rentals. So I spoke today to Host Compliance, which is a company
Yes.
that Tofino uses to, and they offer services to monitor Airbnb and other online platforms. And they give you a report and they say this many are in compliance or not. And I found actually they actually do an initial meeting with you sort of to set it up, and in that meeting they've done the background review and they give you a report on how many are doing that. So I'm looking to set that up in January to have them give me that background information, so next time we come to council we'll have a little bit more stats.
Could I just follow up in support of that? Because I've got down here host compliance. In all the things that we're going forward, and I think this is excellent. I think we all want to get this resolved. I mean, it is just something whose time has come, and I strongly recommend that we do use host compliance so we have an independent person verifying the actual numbers on the
Data,
island
yes.
and give us data. If you take it to EDC, that's the first thing they're going to ask. Well, what's the numbers? So I hope I'm very glad to hear that you've got that going, Daniel, because I don't see how we can really meaningfully finalize this without some solid numbers, and I think it makes a lot of sense.
it's very efficient also.
Yeah.
What time frame do they get the data? Because January and February is probably, everybody's closed down.
I don't know.
So can they go back and look at last summer's data,
Yeah, I can.
listings?
Yeah.
Because you're not going to get, I don't think, particularly good data in January.
The only thing is, later on in January and February, people are beginning to advertise for the summer trade.
Yeah, we started
So
seeing more
they're beginning to
end of
set the
February,
stall
early
out
March,
for
yeah.
the season. So it'll certainly give us a better indication than anything we've ever had before.
Early days. What was the complaint at 345 Robinson? Noise?
That was
No,
not.
it was a complaint about the land use bylaw.
Oh, just the land use?
Yes.
We should
It's
be talking
anonymous,
about.
but
Okay,
it
sorry.
wasn't a complaint about noise, it was about the use.
All right. What does everybody think about pairing those as Hope said?
I like that.
Yep.
What's your
can read it
proposal? Yeah,
I
tell
can
Yes,
read that,
please.
just so they sort of relate, that council directs staff to develop a work plan for a community consultation process, to develop a short-term vacation rental policy, and that council directs staff to present the work plan to the Economic Development Committee and the Housing Advisory Committee for recommendations and report back to council. So that would be 1.
Okay,
So moved.
Second. Okay.
any further discussion? All in favor? Thank you, unanimous.
And 2, that council defer consideration of TUP-0X-2018. And, sorry?
03.
03. It has a name now, okay. Until such time a short-term vacation rental policy has been adopted and potential amendments to the land use bylaw have been adopted, and that council directs staff to not pursue enforcement on non-land use bylaw compliance on 345 Robinson Road until a short-term vacation rental policy has been considered.
Second that.
Okay, all in favor? Thank you.
Excellent.
Good.
Right,
Whoa, that's moved the rock.
well, it's good to get that going. huh?
Well, it started the process.
Well, we couldn't do it.
It's on very flat ground at this point.
Excellent.
Okay, so we got the, we got correspondence
I just want to say something about the Squamish approach. It's very thorough, and they actually have a lot of data to begin with to inform the public as part of the public consultation. So I hope that we'll be able to get something from host compliance or other sources, so that we could have this kind of informed discussion that this is going to prompt.
They've also shared me a number of their background information, like their survey that they conducted and all that information.
I thought their presentation, the public presentation was awesome.
It was really good.
Okay, correspondence. Chief Bryce Williams, Squaxin First Nations, read the invitation of the Squaxin First Nation final agreement 10th anniversary dated November 20th, 2018. And the recommendation is, does anybody else want to come to this? I'm gonna go. Oh, look at that. Oh, boy.
Well, you're going to take one.
Yeah. We can draw straws on this, or what are we gonna do?
I'll try and go through Strauss or something, but
Why do you-
it's
why do you-
it's appropriate.
Okay,
It's
well,
just because-
look into that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we kind of put a name on this to respond to. When does that have to respond to?
31st.
31st of December.
Well, couldn't you say that Mayor Ender and
Yeah,
a counselor will be coming? And you don't have to provide a name?
I would
Because
like-
April 3rd at this point is a long time to figure out whether they're doing anything or not.
I
Can
don't
we
have
just,
I don't have any problem with that.
let's try that and see what kind of response we get back. So if you do it in the next little while, we'll have time to respond and put a name on it if we do.
Sure.
And then Sue Ellen, you can look up, see if you can get through the trust or something like that.
I
That'd be
wouldn't mind
awesome.
going in.
Just, I like the idea of supporting this, and
Yeah.
I'm just delighted that other people think that too, so
Yeah.
I'm not gonna arm wrestle anybody for it, I just think it's wonderful that we are interested in going.
Okay, for the recommendation,
Just, the council direct staff, RSVP Mayor Ender, and 1 councillor to represent Bowen Island at the Treaty Day 2019 events taking place April 3rd, 2019.
okay.
I'll move that. Oh, sorry. I can't see you like I usually can see.
Sorry, I am.
No, it's fine, it's just
Great.
we're used to
Any
seeing
further
together.
discussion? All in
Yeah.
favor? Oh,
No, I guess I would feel weird if I didn't go, since he's a director and I'm a director. And I
Yeah.
also met with Ben Bissett when I was doing some work on climate change, so I've kind of been there, should go.
okay, see how it rolls.
Yeah.
Okay, so the reports of the committees, commissions, dealt with under the consent agenda, new business, okay. I'm just pressing on fast, Republic Square roll.
Right. This, let me just pull it up here, sorry, I'm on the wrong page. This is on page 98. You've seen this before. It came to our very first meeting. When I was on the phone, it was difficult to present the idea, and anyway, I had put it in late. So it's been deferred, and here it is. I put this together on November 13th. because that was the day, Remembrance Day, and there's some photos attached to this document. And I was standing there watching the celebrations and then looking at the photos later, thinking about the how that potential bus shelter that had been proposed and how a future bus shelter might fit in, or how some of the other things that have been proposed for that area, including changes to traffic or changes to crosswalks and things like that, and including the rock block wall moving. I wondered how all of these would change, or could change, the gathering space, the community ceremonial space there, without us noticing, or without staff knowing that council had concerns about protecting the open public space for these things. And I had thinking about how Remembrance Day is such a special thing on Bowen Island. We get such a huge turnout. I think it relates to our turnout at public elections and things like that. I think it is a very significant gathering for our community. And that's only one of them. I've listed a number of other ones in the recommendation. The Bowfest Parade has to make that corner, and they marshal down there. The Women's March back in 2014 met there, and then walked down towards the causeway. And but different things happen down there, and it goes to what's special about our community that we might not be paying attention to, because we don't really have an open space plan. We think about open spaces, or they tend to be places where you can put things, or where you can make changes, and you're not always considering those things that happen once or twice a year. And I also thought that it spoke to the walkability of our village. And there are, like, all those people got down there without parking down in the heart of the cove, right? So it's sort of I thought it was a demonstration of how walkable our village is, and something we wouldn't want to lose, because in some of the articles I've been reading about how do you do walkable villages, how do you encourage active transportation, part of that is that you need to have a gathering place, a civic gathering place. Even if it was a protest kind of thing like the Women's March was back in 2014, it helps the community as a place to come together outdoors. And I think we should care about the outdoor gathering spaces as much as the indoors. They can be multi-use, and I also think they are transportation places too. If you look at the photo in front of that dog, you will see, that's my dog, but you will see a path forming there, which is on the public right-of-way, and Gordon is pointing it out, but basically people are traveling through these open spaces in ways that we may not always see from a plan point of view, looking at a sketch or a map. And that's another role of public open space, is it's a transportation and active transportation role. Anyway, so I just put this, is that all I wanted to cover? Yes. Value these outdoor spaces as much as we do indoors, and that my recommendation is just that council direct staff to prepare a report with recommendations for how to protect the public square role of the outdoor space used for community gatherings such as annual Remembrance Day ceremonies, other gatherings, including the ones that are listed there, when planning improvements to the larger Cardina Corner Library Cenotaph area, because that's an area that's seeing so many changes and planned and happening, and I just wouldn't like the ability to use it for uses like these to be compromised. So that's my motion. I move that motion.
Yes.
I'm very glad Sue Ellen's actually brought this to our attention. I'm going to ask Maureen, do you remember when we were looking at Snug Cove Working Group, and we looked at this area even further around to a greater extent, this and to a greater extent around the library where the car parking is, and which frankly is none too tidy and doesn't present very well. And we asked that we would look at this area somewhat holistically, right, to see what we could do to take the space that we have right now, which scruffy is not a bad word, and to see whether we could look at the whole thing. And I'm very pleased that you brought this up, because I would even ask, with your agreement, that the area you highlighted there, and I'm looking at the photographs as well, and just going slightly round the corner here at the library, this area, so we
Further
encompass
uphill.
just a little bit, yeah, just to the extent where that car park is. So we try and clean up this slightly bigger area, because I think you've pinpointed it. I think that we had it down. I think it was a recommendation made. There is a recommendation somewhere made by the Snug Cove working group to look at this area, you know, to look at it as a plan to see whether we could. I mean, the new Cove Commons is great, but let's be fair to them. There's an awful lot of work around there which isn't quite done.
Oh, I can speak to that as a,
Yeah.
Mr. Mayor, I can speak to that as a member of the library board, that there's more fundraising needs to be done for that, and there's
Yeah.
active fundraising happening, and there is a plan, and that the landscaping outside of the Cove Commons, after the extra cost for the septic system and those things that were unexpected at the end of the project, and the furnishings that are still needed on the inside. There's still some work to do, and the group knows that. The plan is for that also to be programming space, active outdoor space, maybe even something that would be beautiful enough for a wedding reception to come out onto the lawn, that kind of thing. So just to let you know that is in hand. This isn't only about aesthetics though, this is just about the open space needs and the,
So it ended up being some kind of a policy, I guess, is all you could really do. What if we send it back to the Snug Cove working group?
We don't, at the moment, we'd have to look to the strategic, I think it was part of the strategic plan, to see where that gets folded into. But I certainly support this type of approach. This is our welcome mat as well, and I think it is a key gathering point. And anything that we do to continue at the Snug Cove working group, or as Sue Ellen is suggesting, that enhances this whole area, library across the road, where's photographed. I'm all for it. I'd like to see it looked at instead of little bits piecemeal, as much as we could together to try and get the advantages of space planning.
one thing I'll add is that we did, at one point, way back in 2000, similar to the time that the Cowan Point Athletic Park work was done, Bowen Island Parks and Rec Commission at the time, we asked for it, we got some consultants come and do an open space plan for Cowan Point, the big rezoning that was happening there. Also, they made some island-wide open space recommendations, and I have those. I can dig them out if they would be useful. This is partly why I've worded the motion so generally. Staff prepare a report with recommendations on how to protect. So it's basically what staff, I'm looking to you for, what do you think we should do?
Well, I think council would have to determine that through the strategic planning, where it would fit in.
Could I suggest a revision? Because I'm reacting a bit to the preparing a report. And I think that what may work as well is to have this as sort of a principle that staff would keep in mind when they're doing any improvements. So the suggested revision is that council directs staff to consider how to protect the public space and then just carry on from there. So it's situation specific rather than a general report, which I think would take a lot of time and effort and be not remotely applicable to a specific improvement that were to come up.
I'm open to that as a friendly amendment. This was something that came about on that day, and I wanted to bring it forward closer to that day, so it was a quick one.
Did you catch that?
The council directs staff to consider how to protect, is that?
Yeah, and the rest stands.
Yes.
Are we going to define any kind of an area? Because
Point of order, we're discussing a motion that hasn't been seconded,
I'll second it.
and I'm not going to second it. Yeah.
has been seconded. Any further discussion?
Well, it's a little more palatable with to consider, but staff's got a lot of things to do, and other than just keeping this in mind when they're doing some work, and I think there's lands there that are being used in the public realm that aren't in the public realm. So it's, what does public square mean? And the other, I guess, is I think the fire trucks and the ambulance were probably there out of necessity, so that if there was a call or somebody fainted at the event, they could react, rather than being ceremonial vehicles that needed to be visible.
Well, I was just gonna say, this would be, the way it's being reworded is, I think, a filter for our planning department to consider on a case-by-case basis. If, say, for example, private lands come forward for a rezoning that are in the cove area, then this filter would be considered at that time, as with any of our lands and any changes we make to it. That's certainly how I read the.
Yeah, how would you establish that though?
Well, I think our planning department would look at it and come up with criteria that they would use to consider this on a case-by-case basis.
Perfect.
Yeah.
David, you had a hand up there?
Yeah, I'm not quite sure how it fits, but when Michael or somebody asked, the geography should be extended a little bit. One of the things that will be happening down there, it's just around the corner, down the road a bit, is the redevelopment of the terminal. And that's actually a pretty important piece of work. So it won't be work that we'll be doing, it will be work that BC Ferries will be doing, but we will be involved in the process. And it's not just staff, it'll be committees like BIMTAC and so on, and ferry committee and so on. So I'm not quite sure how it applies to this, it's an important part of the geography.
You should be conscious of it.
I purposefully was just thinking about this Cardina Corner Library Cenotaph area,
Yeah.
because part of the reason for making, because so many towns have town squares, it's part of the architecture or the structure of a sustainable, resilient town. And some of the work I've been reading talks about having a gathering place like this as being part of a resilient community that has it's good for democracy, and good for public expression and community coming togetherness, as well as walkability and transportation, all those other good things. So I had attempted to make it about this.
So I'm happy to support it as it's been amended, and I'm not going to worry about the geography.
Yeah.
We'll get there.
We can expand it
Likewise,
later if we want to.
Yes,
Yeah.
please.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, any further discussion? All in favor? Allison?
I'm not going to vote against it, but
Okay,
I'm just,
unanimous.
Can I just,
Yes.
Michael, further to what your comments were about the aesthetics, that's something that would have to be built into the 2019 budget. So I think maybe it's something we can discuss at strategic planning and.
Precisely. I just actually quite glad that the subject has actually come up, because I think it's time, like the other one, thank you sir, I think it's time has come, and let's put it on the table for part of the strategic direction that we'll need to attend to.
We'll
So
talk about it
couldn't be
tomorrow.
more happy, yeah.
Okay. And we'll move on to 10.2, which is Metro Vancouver Director.
So I think, Rob, we have a couple of meetings.
Yeah.
Do you want to take it, Rob?
Why don't I go first? I went to, I believe it was 2 weeks ago, Friday,
30th, I think.
the 30th, yeah. And it was Metro Vancouver's, so they went through the budget process, through their 4-year budget. It was like 4 hours straight on, so I just sort of picked things that I think we might be interested in. Just one thing that I was sort of aware of, but not completely aware of, is that Metro Vancouver has 4 distinct subgroups. One is Metro Vancouver Regional District, which 2019 will have a budget of 75 million. Then the Metro Vancouver Housing Corporation at 51 million, and then the Metro Vancouver Water District at 289 million, and Metro Vancouver Sewage and Drainage District at 415 million. So I say this because really the bulk of the budget is in water and sewage and garbage, basically, which are 85% of that money is utility driven. So we're not going to be as impacted with some of the numbers that were coming out, which were pretty darn scary, because basically their capital expenditures for the next 5 years is going to be $5.7 billion. And in comparison, in the last 11 years, it was 2.7 billion. So they're doubling, and their time frame is going less than half. and they're expecting a 42% increase in the next 5 years. So that ruffled a lot of feathers in the building, because a lot of people are like, whoa, that's a
42% increase in
cost.
costs.
And a lot of that's the new sewer treatment.
A lot, yeah, like in North Van, which is $800 million. But one thing being said is costs are going up very quickly. Bowen was, in the parks budget for 2019, is 15.9 million, and the Krypton Service Yard was one of the projects listed under there, under 750K, so we're getting a good chunk of that. That being said, I mean, there was a lot of people that were sort of raising concerns about cost escalation, because they're seeing it with TransLink, municipality-wise, and I think for us in this room, especially with all the capital projects also going up, I think being very aware that cost of living are going up across the spectrum all over the place and at very high rates was something that was front and center. Also, what was being, there was this ongoing assumption that the bigger things get, the more cost efficient things get because of laws of economy, and that wasn't bearing out very well based on your numbers. And also it was brought up that a lot of the costs were being driven up by climate change, so that was actually, that was a point that were brought up. One interesting thing is that they were also switching their debt amortization, I believe, to 15 years, and they had some really interesting numbers on how much money you can save by doing that. And when I sort of hear the fire hall going over 30 years, I think that'd be some interesting analysis for us to do to see if we can keep that overall cost down from there. And I think that was that meeting in a nutshell.
Thank you, it's scary.
I can add a bit. So I watched that one on my computer, and then there was another meeting last week. But just to the 15 years, no, their policy is 15 years amortization, which means, and the point is that they're trying to reduce the debt that is a burden down the road. But that does mean that right now, the costs are going up a heck of a lot, because we're doing the North Shore treatment plant, then there will be the Iona treatment plant, both going from primary to secondary. And then on the water side, we need to do, because of the growth of the region, so there's Coquitlam Reservoir, in order to pull water out of that, they need to actually change the intake and make it lower down, make a new intake. And then they need to build some tunnels under Burrard Inlet and under the Fraser. So like huge projects. Some of them that are senior levels of government say you've got to do the water treatment, the sewage treatment plants. So there's no way around most of these things. But it's the issue came up because the new mayor of Burnaby had put that point of order he wanted to say, point of order, I'm sorry, that a notice of motion that the budget be
Reviewed.
Temporary, not temporary.
Reviewed.
Yeah, be reviewed, but it'd be, I'm forgetting the word.
Interim?
Interim, until they had a detailed review. Now, so what happened, it was a phenomenal review by staff of all of the projects that they're doing. But to some of the numbers that Rob was saying, like the budget next year, the increase in 2019 is 8.5%. For overall for Metro Vancouver, 15.6% for liquid waste because of the sewage treatment plants, 6% for water. But none of those, but the other two don't apply to us. For the regional district, it's just 2%. So, from our perspective, this is not something that we need to worry about. The other folks are worrying about it. At the meeting this last Friday, the mayor of Burnaby withdrew his motion, recognizing that, okay, the 2019 budget is really set, and recognizing also that there's an opportunity to go into the committees for each one of these projects and look at the 5-year plan and see what can we do to move it out, change it up, do something to reduce this, or are there really no options? There's a list of, I've got 16 things that staff is supposed to prepare answers to different questions that people have that they will be doing over the next little while. So that was so the meeting this last Friday, there were actually 2 meetings. One was to finish Rob's meeting, and that's what I just described. Just withdrew his notice of motion, recognizing that things were actually not as bad as it seemed. The second one was just external appointments. So Craig Hodge is reported from Coquitlam, will be on the UBCM executive. There are a bunch of other external appointments, and I'm appointed to the Lower Mainland Flood Management Strategy Leadership Committee, which is,
Don't get washed away.
which actually is, so I Googled it to see, okay, what on earth is this? And it's really quite interesting, actually. It is a leadership committee from a group that's working on this. And
Fraser
it's a-
Basin Connector.
Fraser Basin, yeah. So with reps from the feds, from the province, from the other regional, the Fraser Valley Regional District, as well as Metro Vancouver Regional District and Fraser Basin. So it's quite interesting. Climate change is one of the big issues, and that's probably why I got put onto that committee. Anything else? No, that's it.
May I
Yeah.
ask a question? 15-year amortization,
Yes.
is this the new gold is this the new standard?
That's Metro Vancouver standard they've had for a long time.
Yeah, now, I gotta ask us, maybe Alison to help as well. If we say it's 15, has it always been 15? Or are
For
they
as long
transitioning
as-
from a 30-year
No.
to a 15-year?
It's been 15 years for as long as I've.
It's
been-
always been 15. Okay, so they don't
Well, I
have
don't
any...
know about always. but
No,
the
but
last-
they don't have, they're not dealing with
It's pay as
30-year
you go.
amortizations.
But that's
wrong.
Most municipalities go 30 years,
Yeah.
and they take out a loan, because when you go with a 15-year amortization, you may be saving money. But let's say you borrow $2 million, you're repaying the $2 million plus interest over 15 years.
Yeah.
Where is that money gonna come from? It's gonna come from your
It does.
taxpayer.
Yeah.
So we have to have a stable source of revenue as tax revenues, which means you would have a higher tax rate
Right.
increase
Yeah,
to
that's right.
fund that shorter
Yeah.
amortization
Yeah,
period.
Absolutely.
So that'll be the debate that came up, should we change this and so on, and it's a policy, their finance policy that they've had for a while, and they'll have a look at that, obviously. There were some people who are arguing that it should be shorter.
But they're building assets that have way more than a 30-year life.
That's correct.
too.
Yeah.
So 30 years makes sense on the life of the
Like,
asset.
just pay more for it.
It's- yeah.
Just,
Well, today's interest rates are pretty low.
when we've talked in the past about the Vancouver, Metro Vancouver numbers, they are horrifyingly large.
Yeah.
Your point that, given the requisition that we pay, that we would be paying 2%.
Yeah.
That translates into, I believe, something like an extra $2,000 a year. It's not a lot of money
Island-wide.
Yeah, for the whole island.
for the whole island.
Yeah, oh, I did want to add a little bit. One of the great things of the presentation was they looked at the costs of these very big things compared to comparable regions, cities or regions, something roughly comparable. And we're in a good ballpark. We're better than many. But also when you look at it in terms of the costs, so even for these expensive things like water or sewage, you get your full service sewage treatment for the cost of, a couple of cups of coffee per day. I mean, it's hardly anything when you think of what it actually is. It's amazing, what you're getting for
What's that, $10 a day?
It depends on coffee. Yeah.
Depends where you buy your coffee.
Yeah.
It does. I mean, I could have brought you the data, but it's just that when you look at it, actually, it's pretty
Pretty good value.
amazing what you get.
Okay, well, let's move on to the trust then.
Sure. I've prepared a few notes here. I wanted to let you know that we've been looking at the Bowen contribution to the Islands Trust budget, and that's already through a few economic development, executive committee and financial planning committees meetings. That's been reduced now 1.5 percentage points. Anyway, from 14.5 down to 13. And as they tighten up the calculations, and they are going to look, like I mentioned the last time, at options. Staff are going to look at options for how to calculate the Bowen contribution amount, but it's going to take a little bit of time
Sure,
because of the period of the where they are in the budget right now. So we're working on that. I've been to various meetings. I wanted to let you know about water licensing. Commercial water licensing is an issue that's come up through the trust because we have hired a freshwater specialist who looks at groundwater, and this is an issue more on some of the islands than on Bowen, where they're having 4.5 month droughts in the summer. And anyway, he's been looking at the new Water Sustainability Act and its provisions. So basically, I've been sending Daniel some information because it relates to commercial businesses. If you're using water from a well or surface water that you're collecting, by March the 1st, think it's March the 1st, you're required to have a license if you're using it for commercial uses. So I've passed that on to Daniel. He might be able to put something into the information that goes out with business licenses and things like that. It
Is it
seems
just groundwater? Or
Need a
surface?
license anyway.
groundwater.
Okay, so that's wells.
Yeah, and, but it could be what the things that are called surface wells. Anyway, I just wanted to let you know that there are regulations and there's a press release, maybe we can put it in the next information item, that one, as on the next agenda. I saw bylaw 461 again. As a member of the executive committee, when bylaws or rezonings are referred to the Islands Trust, it comes to the executive committee, I look at them again. So just to let you know, so that's how it works. And that one, for example, was Rondi's float home, one that was referred to the Islands Trust. So just so you know. I also just wanted to say a few things about this visit to the San Juan Islands, because it was fascinating to visit their office in that they're as a county, they also do services, so it was like a Bowen Council meeting, more than a Islands Trust meeting. I just wanted to pass along a few things that are similar or that relate to us on Bowen. They've got a study on the economic consequences to San Juan County of a medium oil spill. So it's a new piece of evidence that they're looking at in order to help them figure out what do they have to prepare for. So I'll get a copy of that, and if anybody's interested, I'll have that available. They have been doing a 1% real estate transition tax. So whenever a property changes hands, they collect 1% of that, and it goes into a home fund, which they use to fund attainable housing, affordable housing. And with their recent election, they just had an election in November, they asked for an increase, and they got a 1.5% increase, I think. Anyway, it went up with the support of most electorate, because they also have this affordable housing problem. But that's one thing, they have this home fund. I know we've got a housing fund and things like that, but just that they're seriously going after it, the same as us, in that they have like a 1 acre of land down there in Friday Harbor, and they're trying to figure out, working with partner groups to put affordable housing on it. Very similar to us.
Transition tax is like our property purchase tax, I presume?
I think so.
Something like that.
Transaction tax. And, but they put it into this home fund specifically, so I just thought you might be interested. I mentioned about the ferries. I wanted to mention, they had a suggestion about cannabis, because of course Washington State is a couple of years ahead of us. They said, don't worry too much about cannabis on islands, because the economies of transporting product back and forth on the ferry will tend to weed out. You got that. Any of, agricultural players that you maybe have concerned about. So they just suggested that we don't move too fast on that, transportation costs, and I reminded them about Bowen beer. And that's what happened to that. Climate, they have roads falling into the water, and there was an interesting discussion about, among some of the other islands, Salt Spring, for example, has a road that's been built 2, 3, 4 times, and was slow to be rebuilt the last time, so they're concerned about sea level rise, and nobody has any answers, but I just wanted to...
I'm sorry, you said road ends.
No, roads.
Okay, I thought you said rodents.
Oh, no, sorry.
I was imagining
Roads.
Swimming to Lummi Island.
Roads that get washed into the sea, and when the high tides and storms, and they get washed out. Infrastructure at risk, and they've asked their public works to map out what infrastructures are at risk, and what it's going to cost them in flood insurance, that kind of thing. Okay, so I'll go faster. They just ended up with, they're preparing for higher electricity costs, and they are going to joint use wireless to use existing infrastructure, and they are putting in their own last mile fiber on their own, as the county is doing it. Because yeah, that's right, I just want to let that, it's a co-op, technology co-op that they're supporting. That's all. So I just want to give you a taste of some of that, and it's a little bit like the Howe Sound Forum, to go and meet with them,
Yeah,
in that we talk about different things, yeah.
What's the population? Do you know?
No, but San Juan Island that we were on, I think is approximately the same as Boulder,
that's good.
and, or higher.
Be bigger.
Yeah. Because Friday Harbor seemed like a much bigger town.
It's a bigger.
They have a hospital,
Yeah.
14 beds, so it must be more like Salt Spring.
Nice. Michael, do you have anything from the trust?
No, I don't. The only thing I got is just the information piece, just the update on Shaw's position on the internet, because there hasn't been any for trustees, there's been no meeting, so that, so just, and you can see I just put the update from Shaw on the correspondence. And anyone who's, by the way, you could not have driven around Bowen today,
No.
they've not seen a Shaw truck or something,
Or 5 or 6 of them.
doing something somewhere, which is part of the go forward, so.
I hope so. All right, so that's sort of the agenda. We've got a couple of items from the consent agenda that were pulled. 3.2, Allison.
I've got a little problem with the recommendation. They're asking us to approve the work plan and then referring it to the strategic planning process, so it seems to me it's a little backwards. So I would think that we should just be referring the draft work plan to the strategic planning process, and there's a lot of, things in there that have time commitments and everything else, and Sarah's not here, so
I spoke to Daniel and Sarah regarding the commitments, and they're all within her capability.
Okay, and then there's dotted lines around some boxes and regular ones around the others, so I didn't know if that was just typing stuff or there was significance to that, but I just don't understand how we can approve it and then we're referring it to the strategic planning committee, so it just doesn't, and then there's one task that seems to me should strictly belongs to the emergency management committee, not, get rid of it here.
If I could jump in.
Review the hazard, risk, and vulnerability assessment. I mean, why is the emergency management committee doing that?
If I could jump in, we have the same issue with the transportation work plan, and we simply changed the recommendation to that council receive, not approve.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
that would.
Thank you, Councilor Nicholson. I was just looking at the resolution from the transportation plan, and it was that council refer the 2019 transportation work plan to the CFO for consideration as part of the budget, and that it also be referred to the strategic planning process, so no approval.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm the chair of both of those committees, and I agree with the change.
Okay, excellent.
I would suggest that there's no reason to refer this plan to the budget process, if there's no
There's no
funding.
money
No.
involved
No.
in this, it's just.
And it's well within Sarah's work plan to accommodate.
So the resolution will read that council refer the Environment and Climate Action Advisory Committee 2019 work plan to the 2019 strategic planning process.
And delete the whole first paragraph of the recommendation.
That is correct.
So I'll move.
I'll second it.
Okay.
Yep.
Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? Thank you. Unanimous. And the other one that was pulled was 3.3.
I
Maureen?
just had a question about the last part of the recommendation, the staff be directed. And I was curious if you knew at this point which staff. You?
Hope and I.
Hope and you, okay.
Yeah, we're gonna
Thank
work
you.
with Anne, we have an appointment already set up next week.
And it related to my earlier question, not tonight, but an earlier question regarding community services.
And Sean and I have had that discussion, and normally she'd be the one to work with BCC about this, but she has that January 23rd deadline. And if we do get this grant funding, which seems to be that they want to give the funding to get the stats back, Sean and I have already been talking about next steps.
Thank you.
You want to read that?
Happy to make the recommendation that Bowen Island Municipal Council support the Community Child Care Planning Program grant application to engage in child care planning activities in order to develop a community child care space creation action plan. That Bowen Island Municipality is willing to provide overall grant management if successful, and the staff be directed to work with the Executive Director, Bowen Children's Centre, to prepare and submit the grant application by January the 18th, 2019.
I'll second that.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor? All right, unanimous. Thank you. So that ends the regular council meeting. It is now adjourned.
Mayor Andrew, I think we need a motion to reconvene our closed council meeting.
Yeah. Okay, I was just gonna make that motion that we.
I can just do unanimous consent if everyone is.
Yeah, unanimous
in
consent.
favor of that.
Anybody have an objection?
Question period, you've got Bronwyn.
Ah, Bronwyn. Anything? What have you got?
I have questions.
Okay, come on up.
What, go ahead.
Yeah.
Okay, the committee you're on with the, for Metro,
Yes.
so that's, like Maureen used to be on the, Parks Board, so we're no longer, Bowen no longer
No.
has a representative on
No,
the
no,
Parks
no,
Board.
those standing committees are not yet appointed.
Oh, okay, so this is totally different.
This is totally different.
Oh,
This is
okay.
an outside external committee appointment,
This is an external committee, okay. So we still have the potential to be on the Parks Board.
or whatever.
The,
That's right.
okay.
There's, can I just clarify, there's the Metro Board, and
Mhm.
I was on the Metro Board, and David's now on the Metro Board.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's the Parks Committee, and that's what hasn't been set up.
Yeah.
Okay,
And then an array of other committees, and so we'll see what happens.
so this flood, Lower Mainland flood.
Yeah.
A bunch
It's
of
an
outside
external
organizations that
agency.
Metro appoints representatives to.
Yeah.
Got it, thank you. And this water license for commercial purpose, so because if we didn't have business licenses,
Different.
this is well, because you're talking about business licenses and how, if there's a business, then they'll need to have a license to access the water well.
This is a licenses that the province requires,
Mhm.
and what I'll do is I will, and then we just want to let people know, partly, so that they can keep their water rights, or so they don't run out of water in a dry summer because the
Yeah.
province didn't know that they were taking water, and I'll send you the press release, how about that? Or
Perfect.
the notice that I got from the Islands Trust, okay?
And we're just trying to help disseminate the information, and that's why with business licensing, we'll include that information.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm happy to send you that.
That's it.
Okay,
That's it? Thanks, Bronwyn. Okay, so we've reconvened the closed council meeting. We just got a couple items left. Oh, God, it's so close.
Yeah, I'm just gonna try.
So close.
Bronwyn and Bronwyn.
Oh, that stuff, yeah.
We just have to.
Yeah, yeah.
I'm not here.
It's all.
Oh, I got that on Facebook.